So welcome to #Wednesdays Weekly, a weekly information session in collaboration with voluntary sector and public sector partners. So today's training is on an introduction to measuring impact and will be delivered by Sarah PS from Action Together. Over to you, Sarah.
Brilliant, thank you, Hayley. So welcome everybody, and thank you for putting a few things in the chat. I'm going to have another go at sharing my screen. So let's have a look. Here we go. So can you see presenter view, Hayley? Yeah.
No, I could just see the slides.
Brilliant. Perfect. Lovely. So thanks everybody for joining. I asked you all about sort of different sentences to pop in the chat, what measuring impact means to you. So we've had some great sentences here. So Diane, what is the change? Heather, how much of a difference something has made? Evaluating the impact of your project, gathering really useful information, but hard work. Good to showcase the work that you do and impact and needs to be worthwhile. And measuring what impact your work activity has made to your local area and the people you work with. So really similar definitions and actually really nice ones. I've got some here that are quite heavy really. So impact practice is what an organisation does to plan, understand, communicate and improve the difference it makes in the world. And I really like that one because it includes the planning side, which we're going to talk a lot about, and then that communication as well. So not just evaluating what's changed, but really thinking about that and talking about that as well. And then impact measurement stands for the process of quantitatively and qualitatively evaluating the impacts of an organisation, so collecting those numbers and also those stories as well. So why is impact measurement useful? So it measures, is useful as a measure to report to external audiences and funders. So when you're funded, you can explain the difference you've made with that funding. It helps you to design effective programs and services and access funding opportunities and identify gaps. If you're measuring your impact and you're evaluating and assessing that, then that can help you with future projects around what you need. Developing insight from beneficiaries, so looking at co-producing and participation in future projects or within those projects. It can improve stakeholder engagement. So if you're, continually communicating about the difference that you're making, either through social media, through annual reports, through monitoring reports, and people are engaging with what you're doing and the difference that you're making. It can identify and mitigate the negative impact, so things that haven't gone well. If you don't collect that information and look at that data and analyse it, you might not spot it all. It's great in terms of enhancing and scaling any programmes as well. So if you want to do something again, if you're holding a pilot or a prototype, that evaluation will really help. Again, just monitoring the programme progress, so seeing how far you've got. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes it's not until I sort of sit back and think about all the different things I'm doing, or if I'm having to write up something for a presentation or monitoring, then I'll really realise, the amount of work that we're doing. You can use it to predict long-term impact as well. When you start seeing those trends coming through in your short-term work, you can think about that long-term impact. And also it works for continual organisational and personal development. So you're always developing, you're always thinking of innovative ideas, and you're using that impact measurement and evaluation to do that. So there's 4 simple steps when it comes to impact measurement, and Inspiring Impact call that plan, do, assess and review. So really everything, there's a lot of emphasis on this bit, is actually the planning, which is I think where people perhaps miss out with impact measurement, you kind of start doing the project and think, oh gosh, I need to start collecting this and that, and oh, we've got monitoring coming up. And the more you can put some time in to plan beforehand, the more everything else will run really, really smoothly. So we're going to think a lot about the planning today. So in terms of planning your impact, that's thinking about defining your audience. So who you're communicating your findings to, but also who your audience is that you're hoping your project or program will reach. Thinking about your impact goals, so your short, long-term, intermediate and long-term goals. So what difference are you trying to make, and what you're trying to do now, and what you're trying to do for the future. Planning your activities to achieve the change. So if this is what you want to change, make sure that what you're trying to do reflects that. And then thinking about what data do you need. So what do you collect now? What do you already have? And what don't you have that will be really useful? And again, Inspiring Impact has a learn to measure plan. So they have sets of questions that you can fill out about who's your audience, who's your intended audience, you know, how do you communicate with this audience, and you can fill all of those questions out, and that really helps you really delve deeply into thinking about who your audience is and your activities. And then one of them I mentioned in the last slide was your impact goals. So I thought I'd go into this a little bit more, and this is what we'll look at a bit more today. So what is the long-term change or impact you're aiming for? So thinking about those big sort of social, environmental, economic changes that you're hoping to make a difference in a person's life. And what shorter term changes or outcomes are you aiming for that contribute to your longer term changes? So this might be learning a new skill, or some awareness about something, or motivation, or a behaviour change. And what does the existing research say about how to achieve the change you want to see? So what reports are out there? What do they suggest that should be done? And are your activities, is your programme reflecting that? So something I really wanted to show you today was something called a logic model. And this is a really simple model to think about where you're starting, what you put in, and where you get to within your project. And they're really good to do, not as an organisation, but more as a project by project model. So this is kind of one iteration of what it could look like. And then here's one I made earlier, kind of an action together one. So there's 6 headings. So we've got inputs, activities, outputs, short-term outcomes, intermediate outcomes, and long-term impact. So the inputs are the resources needed for your project. So your staff, the partnership, the venues, the support you need, anything you want to put in there basically is your inputs. So what you're putting in, the funding, anything like that. And the activities are what you do with those resources. So you thinking about having particular sessions each week. Is it training? Is it about listening? Is it about doing a certain thing? So what are you doing basically? The outputs are the direct products that come from the activities. So how many sessions have you held? Have you come out with anything like a product? So for example, if you were doing a gardening project, have you ended up with, you know, a certain amount of flower beds or bulbs planted or trees planted? How many sessions, how many people attended that? So this is a little bit where some numbers might come in. Yeah, whatever the project centered around will be those outputs. And the short-term outcomes are the changes in learning from attending your program. So what has changed? Is it about attitudes, awareness, knowledge, or skills? Or is it about people's opinions and motivations and aspirations? It could be all of them, but just listing what they could be. The intermediate outcomes are the changes that happen in that person's life following attending your program. So not just in the moment, but how they might change after that. So it could be around a person's behaviour or decision making. It could be, if it's an organisation, about their policies and procedure. It could be about their involvement with social action. So what do they go on and do afterwards? And then the long-term impact. And this one's really interesting because we can't always claim that everything comes from this one project that we do. You can never entirely prove that. So if somebody goes through an employment program and in the intermediate they end up getting a job, absolutely, they've come through your employment program, they've their short term might be that their motivations change, they've got skills around their CV. The intermediate might be that they land a job. The long term impact might be that they take on further education, that that person ends up buying a property for the first time, getting married, having kids and having a wonderful happy life. And you can't take credit for all of that, but you're certainly a contributing factor. And that's how to think about it. So I've done a little example for you. So imagine it's a healthy eating program for families. So our inputs are grant funding, staff time, food, the community venue, training. We've got a partnership with a deli. We've got apprentices that are on board. We're using marketing to advertise it. And we've got a referral process linked in with adult care. So what activities, what we're going to be doing? We're having healthy eating workshops, cooking sessions, eating together. We'll be growing food, and we're having video diaries as well. So the outputs of that are what we aim to have is 15 workshops over a period of 15 weeks, 10 sit-down dinners, 5 green champions, and over 100 vegetables grown. So that's what we're aiming for. So your outputs could be quite different when you evaluate, but you've got to kind of think about what you're aiming for at the beginning. Our short-term outcomes are that people understand, have a better understanding of eating well. They have experience in growing food. They can cook a menu of home-cooked meals, and they can shop healthier on a budget. The intermediate outcomes are a person has increased confidence with cooking, they have more family activity time, they cook as a family, they've got increased awareness of the benefits of healthy eating, and improved budgeting in the home, allowing for other activities. And the longer term impact of that is they have lower risk of obesity-related diseases, better school attainment for their children because they're eating healthier, they're sleeping better, they're getting up for school, increased employment chances, and overall longer life expectancy. So those are the long-term impact. So I think I've talked for quite a while now. So what we'd like you to do is we split you up into breakout rooms. So you should be in groups of 3 or 4. And what we'd like you to do is use the logic model template. So I've sent you examples of that as a handout. Hayley sent it out. But what I'd like you to do is just kind of draw some blank ones now, because I couldn't figure out how you could write on this without making it really complicated. So if you just put inputs, activities, outputs, short-term outcomes, intermediate outcomes, and long-term impact as headings across your pages now. And then what we'll do is we'll put you into breakout rooms. And what I'd like you to do is have a think about an activity, whether it's a project, whether that's yours or a fictional one you decided as a group. And I'd like you as a group to fill that out together, to think about the inputs, activities, outputs, short-term outcomes, intermediate outcomes, and long-term impact. So yes, so hopefully, does everybody understand that? I'm just going to stop so I can see everybody. Yeah, give me a nod or a no if you don't get it. Brilliant. Hello, hello, welcome back. I hope that was a good breakout session. Sounds like you were talking to the very end, so that's good. So we've got, I'm just going to say Emma's group and Julie's group. So group 1, Emma's group. Was there anybody you selected to give us a bit of feedback on how it was and what you kind of picked for your activity?
Emma, do you want to feedback just because you were making notes?
Yeah, by default, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so It was Heather who given an example about who's from Adullam Housing, which is a supported housing project, and they have been doing some gardening, or an idea around gardening, and the gardening project that they're gonna do, or they are gonna do. So that's what we looked at, a proper example. So the kind of things that we talked about is so like the inputs from that was staff time, planters, grant funding, seeds. Talked about a venue where people could come and pick up the seeds from, and kind of marketing material in terms of newsletters and staff to get the word out. So that were the kind of inputs we talked about. So the activities we talked about is people planting at home, like doing actual planting, growing, people sending in progress pictures of their planting and how they're getting on, and people doing the actual collecting and coming to collect the seeds. So that they're the kind of activities we talked about. And outputs kind of it's to do with kind of, we started panicking at this point where we thought we were running out of time. So it was like, you know, vegetable grown. That's what I got in terms of the outputs and how many of them vegetables are actually grown at home. Then we started talking about outcomes. So the short-term outcome, I've got one, understanding and how to plant. So people's understanding and how to do that. Immediate outcomes, kind of increasing confidence of people planting, improvement in health and well-being, physical and both mental because they're outdoors, as well as you know, and then the improvement in mental and physical long-term impact as well is health and well-being and physical and mental well-being as well. So that's what we got to. We started panicking, like I said, so these are the only things that we got down before we got pulled out.
Yeah, it was it's tough to do in 10. I said 15, but there's still quite a lot to go through, so I'd only given you 10, but hopefully that's useful to, the model is quite useful to break it all up, because I think sometimes it can be really hard to start when you're talking about evaluation. You think, oh, well, what, you know, it just really helps break it down. So that sounds really, really good. And I think there's loads of, you know, real benefits around health and well-being and fitness there, as well as that knowledge about how to be, you know, a grower and things about more sustainable as well. So yeah, really, really good. Julie's group, who is feeding back?
Sorry, that will be me. They voted me when I mentioned I worked for Action Together, and we did choose an Action Together project actually, the community food warehouse. So
wonderful.
So again, it wasn't a long time, but we rattled through it and we did run out of time at the end. So the inputs were the grants and the funding that we've received to sort of support the warehouse, staff time, running the warehouse, food into the warehouse either through donations or bought food, volunteers time, the volunteers who are supporting the work of the warehouse, the different partnerships that are involved with making the warehouse work, marketing, the different marketing involved to promote the warehouse, the number of hours that the warehouse is open, and again the venue was obviously an input as part of this project because Sparth has been sort of gifted to us by the council to host the community warehouse. Is that it, gang? Yeah, activities. Obviously, we've got the Street Ambassador programme, a programme where we use volunteers to help bring in donations to the warehouse. There's one activity, volunteers, and anything to do with training around volunteers would be an activity. Possible cooking sessions, if there were cooking sessions at the warehouse, family cooking sessions, menu cards, those types of things could be the different activities that could be run out of the warehouse alongside the obviously food in and food out. Outputs would be how often you're open, the funding, how much funding you'd spent, and then all the controllables around number of groups who are using it, number of parcels, number of volunteers, and that list could be as long as you wanted. Short-term outcomes would be less families suffering food deprivation across the borough, families eating better, reduction of stress in families. Intermediate outcomes would be better food, better access to food, families enjoying cooking, people becoming healthier, and long-term impact, no food deprivation across the borough. Thanks.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well done. Got rattled through loads in such a short period of time. So that's fantastic. And it sounds like you've already got the hang of that. So that's great. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about the kind of doing side of it once we've done a bit of planning and data as well. So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen if that's all right with you. Let's have a look. We go down here. So we've had a look. Bear with me. Lovely. So we've all populated our logic models. And again, I hope this is something that you can use again at home and for all your projects as a great starting place. And I just wanted to show you what that can grow into. So this is something called a theory of change, and there's loads of different examples for lots of different organizations. And this builds on the simpler model of the logic model, but it's for the whole organization. And so this one's, and people can make them really visually pleasing as well, but this one talks about, so their theory of change, they're an organization that kind of teach music on the fringes of the criminal justice system. So their mission is to inspire positive change in individuals on the fringes of the criminal justice system through creating original music. And their vision is for a safer and more just society. So they talk about their values there, and they talk about how their programs amplify the aspirations of prisoners, ex-prisoners, and young people. So they've got kind of three main things they do here. So music in prison, sounding out, so that's for ex-prisoners, and making tracks, which is for 16 to 25-year-olds. And then they think about each of their steps here. So this is a little bit like the inputs and outputs. And what they've done is they've talked about their outcomes, and then their long-term outcomes here are in red. And then the kind of, or intermediate, and then their long-term outcomes are here as well. So they're talking about what they're doing and how the outcomes of that as well. So they work with professional musicians to write songs and learn instruments. And so those people feel able to express, explore, and experiment. So that's really nice way of showing you what that can look like. And if you look at organizations' theories of change, loads of them look really, really different. But they're really useful and powerful documents, because I really believe on getting something on it in a page, because nobody ever really reads long reports. So when you meet people, that's something that you can just get out and show exactly what you do. And your mission statements on there, your values are on there, the activities you do, what the long-term outcomes you're striving towards are on there as well. So that's a really useful document. So moving on, so we're going to go into doing the do, but beforehand I just wanted to talk about data. So we'll go through these a little bit more, but just wanted to go through these definitions now. So user data is information on the characteristics of the people you are reaching, so the users of your service or your activities. The engagement data is information on how service users are using your service and the extent to which they use it. So if you've got a weekly program, are they coming every week, or are they dropping in and out? Feedback data, so information on what people think about the service. So this is one we're quite familiar with and use a lot. Outcomes data, so information on the short-term changes, benefits, or assets people have got from the service. So thinking about what you've planned out in your logic model, and is that happening? And impact data, information on the long-term difference that resulted from the service. So what are those long-term impacts that's happened in people's lives? So doing the do. So things that we can do in terms of collecting that information. So routine data collection. So we should all have things in place like sign up. So making sure that when people sign up to your programs, you've got all their details. You've got regular feedback surveys that go out at particular points and you've planned for that. You've got online resources in terms of and you collect that. So for example, if you've got a newsletter that you're looking at how many times that's opened or read, and event attendance. So every time you hold an event, make sure that you're collecting the information about how many people have attended that event as well. And create a data collection plan. So think about all the things you need to collect and make sure that's in somewhere that you can go back to and make sure that you're ticking that off every time. The other things that could look like are surveys, focus groups, and case studies. So focus groups are talking around a particular issue that you want to focus in on and talk about and hear people's views. A case study is more, you're less kind of involved in probing, you're just kind of hearing about somebody's journey through your program. Observations, so these are really, they're quite often missed out really, but that's from your facilitators, your professionals. Where do they feedback their observations about their sessions or individuals? Where are you capturing that? And also thinking about visual creative methods. So, you know, do you ask people to do a video diary, and can you collect snippets from that? Things like using word clouds or graffiti walls can really capture some really nice feedback that's quite quick. And again, think about your social media as well. Something that we use quite a lot in our reports is that we'll screen grab something that somebody said about us on Twitter about attending an event or finding something really useful. And again, that looks really powerful because it's not just us talking about something that we've done well, it's showing that other people are doing that as well. So, and then the assessing bit. So this is just really easy. If you've got everything in place and you planned it and you're doing it, the assessing bit doesn't actually take too long. So you've identified the research questions that you want to answer. So you're thinking about those outcomes and have you hit them? So really all you're doing is comparing to what it was like before. So how do people feel at the beginning? And that might be that you do baseline surveys, and then you ask the same questions later on and you make those comparisons and you sit down and you say, right, in April 2021, this is how people felt. In September 2021, this is how people felt. And what, you know, crunch those numbers. So 50% of people felt a lot better 3 months into the program, so on and so forth. So it's a lot easier than you think once you've got that comparative. It's just about being consistent and collecting the same data. And then once you've got that, making those comparisons are really, really easy. So we're going to go a bit more into the data. And I just want to give a few examples of the kind of things you can ask. So as we said before, user data is about collecting information on the characteristics of the people you are reaching. So when you look at that, you're thinking about, have we reached our intended target audience? So actually, if you've got a program that you have put together for over 60s, have many over 60s come? Or have you found that there's a few people in their 50s that have snuck on? Or actually everyone's over 60, but they're all in their 70s. And what does that mean? And what does that say about your program? How do people find you? Do you notice a particular trend in terms of how people from a certain characteristic engage with you as well and find your program? And are you going to the right places? Engagement data, so thinking about how people are using your service and the extent to which they use it. So have you got a drop-in session, but actually you've got the same people coming every week? Or do you have a scheduled program but people drop in and out? And what to do about that, and thinking about you know, how does that feed into how you plan the program next, or adjust or change that? Do you have a program that is for young people, but actually you're noticing you're engaging one particular gender more than another? And what does that mean? And what can you do about that? So it's just noticing really how people are using your service and breaking it down into that. So layering the user data on top of the engagement data and making those comparisons. Feedback data. So again, this is one we're really quite good at in the voluntary sector. One we do well, we get in touch with people and we ask them what they thought. But again, it's analysing that a little bit more. So who do we get feedback from? Who do we not get feedback from? So actually, are we really good at working with families and we get great at getting feedback from the children, but not so much from the parents? Or great at getting feedback from parents, but not necessarily carers or other family members? You know, do people enjoy the services? Do they find it useful? What aspects do they rate the highest and the lowest? Pay attention to that. What's working well? What is working less well? And again, differentiate. Do different groups of users respond differently? So perhaps people with younger children find the programme really useful, come every week. You've noticed that those with older children drop in and out a little bit more. And is the service being delivered as we intended? And so often what we intended to do turns out slightly differently. But again, if you capture that and you can identify what those trends are or what those differences are and feed that into your evaluation and think about how you might run that next time, that's all really useful. It doesn't have to be negative. It can, how many times have we run a program and found what we'd call an unintended outcome? So something we didn't mean to happen. So actually, when we were delivering crisis parcels over the pandemic, how many people actually then end up making connections with the people that were dropping off the parcel and having a conversation on their doorstep? So actually it became a little bit about supporting those who were isolated, not just those who couldn't access food. Outcomes data. So again, what are the changes in behaviour, attitudes and skills among our users? So thinking about, so that's whether you use the STAR outcome or whether that's through feedback. But how has our service helped? What can be attributed to our work? So some factors might contribute that have nothing to do with what we planned, but you know, thinking about how the pandemic's changed our work, or you had an outdoor project but the weather was particularly bad. How do all of those contributing factors play a part? Are the results consistent? So again, do we achieve better outcomes for some groups of users? Where do we get our best results? Where are our most effective activities? Are we helping those in greatest need? So again, those that we really wanted to support, are we reaching them? And then our impact data. What is the long-term difference to our services? So again, if this is something that we really want to track, how are we staying in touch with those people that have been on our programme? And what other factors have contributed to this change? So again, really thinking about that social, economic environment and context and how that has contributed as well. A quick word on qualitative versus quantitative. Quantitative, can never say it. So what we need is a mixture of both. They're both really, really good, and we tend to lean to one another depending on the type of organisations we are, or even just the personalities that collect that impact measurement data. But quantitative is numerical data, so thinking about numbers. How many people attended that session? How many people, what percentage of people have felt the session was useful, or felt happier, or felt more confident? Those can make some really powerful statements. You can put them in surveys and charts and graphs, and you can play around with all sorts of things. Qualitative is really useful as well because it's very, very powerful. So it's reflective, it's unmeasurable, but uses languages and stories. And as human beings, that's what we tend to engage with more. So thinking about those focus groups and case studies and observations. And my tip there is that you don't always need loads of really lengthy case studies, like I said, just snapshots of those tweets, or you know, somebody sends you a really nice little message or a picture of a card that someone sent, or a little bit of, you know, run some feedback activities, or even pictures of people really looking like they're enjoying themselves, can tell a whole story. And again, think about that, particularly those stories that you collect, how you can use them in different spaces. So if you include a long one in a write-up, but then you use a paragraph of that for a monitoring report, if you use a sentence for that on your social media. So getting those same stories, but in lots of different ways and lots of different places as well. And then thinking about your review. So we've done that by analysing those questions as well, but we sort of sum it all up. So what does the story tell you? Does the data tell you anything unexpected? So actually, what were those unintended outcomes? Did you run a program for young people, but actually you found that you engaged with parents as well, really well? And that's something that you have found that you want to work on and grow and investigate and share that story as well. So if you want to make some powerful impact, plan where you're going to share that story. Is that going to be released in annual report on X date? Is that going to be released in your social media? Is that going to be talked through at an all staff meeting? And then bits of that are broken up into a really helpful presentation that staff can use to tell other people in other meetings and network spaces as well. So really making sure that it doesn't just sit dusty on a shelf and you've done a bit of, you know, number crunching, and then you might pull it out for the next bid. It's really shouting from the rooftops about what you've discovered. And the way to do that is by embedding an impact culture into your organisation. And that means that everybody's involved. So it's not just one person's job. In our organisation, our sort of monitoring comms manager pulls all this together, but he relies on us to be part of that and to be part of that journey. And also it can be such a lot for one person to compile, especially if they're not the person that's on the ground as well. So make it everybody's job and make sure everybody's involved, everybody knows that it's coming up, create incentives, schedule time to plan, so protect time in calendars to make sure people have time to do this and communicate it. Schedule time to update as well, because if people don't see the outcomes of what they put in, they might find, you know, your motivation to do that is less. And embrace failure and celebrate the wins. And I've got a lovely quote here about failure, which failure can become our most powerful path to learning if we're willing to choose courage over comfort, which I really like. It's a Brené Brown quote. And again, that sometimes we might shy away or procrastinate from doing impact measurement because we might think we've not done as well as we wanted to. And actually that doesn't always matter. It's sometimes about what that story will tell us and where we need to go next. So that can be really, really useful as well. So that brings me, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to take through some tools that you can use to measure. So I've talked about the inspiring impact, and this is really useful. And you know, I could spend so much, like this session could be like 4 hours longer if I went through everything that's on this website. They've got self-assessment tools, so you can just literally plug in the name of your project, and they'll ask you questions, and it'll say this is the data you should collect. Gives you lots of questionnaires about what you can use, and there's loads of blogs and stories and examples on there as well. Thinking about the other one is the UK data service. So when we talked about what's out there already, this publishes government data and outcomes relevant to the charity sector. So for example, wellbeing, school results, reoffending rates. So make sure you've got your information there as well. And youth impact as well. So it's around, it's very youth centered, but it's really useful resources. And they have something called the 4-pillar approach, which is a slightly different approach to impact measurement as well. So there's some really useful things we can do there as well. So I've got a quick poll for you, which I'm going to share with you before you go. But before I do that, I just wanted to check if anybody had any questions.